If you finally consider yourself as a cyclist and you are a beginner, you likely have a lot of questions about how the entire thing works. Maybe what is a training zone and what are you actually supposed to do to improve on the bike and what do you need and what do you not need? And so in today's video, I'm going over a list of questions that my clients ask me as beginner cyclists. Hopefully I can answer them and give you semi-decent answers. So my name is Ely. I am a coach for CEO cyclists. If you're a C-suite, entrepreneur, business owner, founder, and you just took up cycling, I am the coach for you. Without further ado, let's dive in. Question number one is, how do I get faster? So I have a whole video about this, literally how to get faster on the bike. There's a few things that you got to know. Speed in cycling is made up of 4 things and then some like small, minute. Number 1 is going to be weight. Number 2 is power. 3 is aerodynamics. And 4 is gradient. And then you have other marginal things like tires and stuff like that. But let's just talk about these core 4. The first one being weight. Obviously, the lighter you are, the faster you will go because you're literally carrying around less weight. For example, if you have a 200 horsepower engine and you put that 200 horsepower engine in a very light motorcycle versus putting it in a semi-truck, it'll make a huge difference because you won't even have to use as much power to get you around. A semi-truck has a lot more weight, it's a lot heavier, so you're going to have to obviously use a lot more power to get you around. So to reduce the weight, you can either reduce weight off yourself, body weight, fat and whatnot, or you can reduce from the bike. And nowadays, bikes are pretty light. So already, like anything you reduce, if you're getting a carbon bike with carbon wheels, you've already opted for one of the lightest bikes out there. You can keep reducing, like going from a 105 to an Ultegra to a Dura Ace group set, for example, or getting a lighter handlebar. But like all of these are marginal and cost a lot more than just fixing your body, working on the engine first, which takes us into number 2, which is power, the second thing that influences your speed. And if you're actually trying to improve your power on the bike, this is where training comes into play. Now, again, let's put this into perspective. Easiest way to compare it is to a car. If you have a car that has 100 horsepower, it's going to, and it's the exact same car, exact same frame, exact same weight, and exact same aerodynamics, it's going to go slower than a car that has 200 horsepower. And when we're talking about power on the bike, we're not talking about horsepower, of course, because you're not a horse. We're talking about watts. Now, when we look at watts, there's a few things that we want to look at. There's your average power for the entire ride, literally your average wattage. Then there's a number called FTP, broken down into what we call functional threshold power. Or the simplest way to explain it, it is the hardest that you can ride for 20 minutes. Realistically, it's actually an hour, but no one wants to pace 1 hour of riding because that's mentally exhausting. So we put it down into 20 minutes and we take 95% of that number. The reason that this is important is because your lactate threshold is essentially how we determine your training zones. And we'll get to that in the next question. But it also gives us a sense of what your aerobic fitness looks like. And obviously, if you're doing a sport like cycling, your aerobic fitness plays a massive role in how well you're going to do. So power is the next one. Now, there's different types of power. There is the aerobic power, which is being able to produce smaller power numbers for a longer period of time. And there's anaerobic power, which is being able to produce huge power numbers for a small period. So think of it like sprinting or going really hard up a very steep hill. Third thing here we have is aerodynamics. And this really starts coming into play the faster you are getting. Let's say you improved your weight and you improved your power. Now aerodynamics are going to really start taking into effect. And the faster you go, the bigger it makes a difference. Keep it really simple. Imagine a semi-truck and then imagine a McLaren. You have this semi-truck, the wind's hitting it dead on, and it is actively having to put more horsepower and accelerate just to be able to keep on going. Whereas the McLaren is slicing through the air and actually saving energy because it's so aerodynamic. And so the more aerodynamic you can get and your bike can get, then the more power you save and the more efficient you are. And then finally, gradient. Obviously, gradient is going to affect your speed because if you're going down a hill, you're going much faster than if you're going up a hill. And then there's other things, like tires and what. But point being, those are the core 4. If you master those, you're going to get faster on the bike. All right, question number 2. What is a training zone? Well, this takes us back into FTP, that functional threshold power, the hardest that you can ride for 1 hour or 20 minutes in a test. Once you know what that number is, then we are able to develop your training zones. And these are dynamic, meaning they change. If you're improving, they're improving. And if you're getting worse, they're getting worse. So if we estimate your FTP to be around 220, for example, if it's not going to be 220 a month, it might be higher, it might be lower. So we have to actually adapt those training zones. Now, there are a handful of training zones and we can get really complex into this, or we can keep it really simple, which is what I want to do for the sake of this video. The first one is your active recovery zone. This is like a 0 out of 10 on how hard it is. zones. This is the equivalent of you just riding down a hill without pedaling. You're actively recovering. Or you can just be doing some very, very light pedaling. That's active recovery. That would be what we consider zone 1 in terms of your heart rate. In terms of your power, it's around 55% or less of your FTP. Then we have your endurance. Endurance is that's like that zone that we always hear about, zone 2 and working in your zone 2 and whatnot. And in terms of your heart rate, it typically refers to around 60 to 70% of your maximum heart rate. So if you have a maximum heart rate of 200, for example, it's 60 to 70%. But we estimate it to be 56 to 75% of that FTP number. So the heart rate and power number go hand in hand. They're not separate. One helps us inform what the other actually is. So the heart rate is also dynamic. On any given day, it changes. If you had a huge meal and you had a lot of caffeine and you slept poorly, it's going to be higher compared to if you're well rested and you ate well and gave yourself enough time to digest and just feeling good overall. So zone 2 is what we call those long, slow miles. This is the zone that makes your body more efficient at burning fat. So if you've ever been to like Orange Theory, for example, and you hear about the fat burning zone, yes, this is that zone. But we're not just talking about burning belly fat here. We're talking about literally burning lipids as fuel, because your body has sources of fuel, carbohydrates for higher intensities and fats and lipids for lower intensities. Now, after this, we have your tempo zone or zone 3. This is typically what most people spend in their group rides. It's around 70 to 80% of your maximum heart rate and 75 to 90% of your FTP. It's considered like challenging but doable. It should be sustainable, but it should also have you like working, like you're sweating. It's not easy to sustain, but it's sustainable. After that, we have FTP or your threshold, which is around 90 to 105% of FTP. Typically 100%, but if we want to use a range, lower threshold versus upper threshold, and that is typically around 80 to 85, 86, maybe even 90-ish, depending on your heart rate. Everyone's different, percent of your maximum heart rate. This is actually really cool. The lactate threshold, or your functional threshold power, is the zone where you are actively creating lactate and clearing it at the exact same rate. That's why this is really cool. So lactate is that feeling, when your legs are burning and you're producing power and you feel that burn in the legs. The lactate threshold is when you are aerobically taking in enough oxygen to clear lactate while also producing it because you are putting in that. And then finally, we have the anaerobic zones and neuromuscular zones. So I'm not going to spend too much time here, but this is where above lactate, now you have your VO2 max, which is what you can sustain for a little bit above your lactate threshold. And you have the anaerobic zone and neuromuscular zone. And this stuff is really going to raise the heart rate and is sustainable for a much shorter period of time. So next question was, how do you actually do different types of training and what do you actually need to be doing? Like, should you be doing zone 2? Should you be doing zone 1, zone 3, zone 4? A mixture of everything. And the answer here, you're not going to like it, but the answer here is really, it depends. And it depends on your goals, to be honest, because if you are doing cycling as, just to hang on to a group ride, is going to be very different than if you're training for a 100-mile event. It's going to be very different than if you're just training for a 100-meter event. The type of training that you do, where you spend your majority of your time training, what zones to train in, what intervals to be doing, etc., really depend on your goals. Now, there's a few ways that you can do this. Either you can, give a big spiel to some AI about what your goals are, and it can give you some general training plan, and you can try to follow it. And if odds are, if you're a beginner cyclist, this actually might work for you if you have the discipline to be able to stick to a ChatGPT plan. I find most people don't have that discipline or self-accountability, but if you do, it could be a really good option because AI is advanced enough to give you pretty solid workouts nowadays. But the question is not just, you get a workout, but again, the same way that your FTP and your heart rate are dynamic, the workouts should be dynamic as well, meaning they change on any given day and progress week to week. And progression can mean a number of things. It's not necessarily just making the workout longer or making it harder, but you could progress with the cadence. You could progress again with the power. You could shorten your rest times. You could increase your interval times. You could throw some added zone 2 or tempo work or even breath work in the middle of the workout. And there's a lot of different things that you can be doing to progress a workout. But if you want to improve, you have to progress. All right, I'm going to do a part 2 simply because my environment is not great right now. There's construction in the back. There's dogs barking. I hope you don't hear it because I'm on noise cancellation mode for my mic, but it's quite annoying to say the least. So I'm going to do a part 2 with more questions. And if you want to ask a question, feel free to DM me on Instagram at Eli Samahat. Literally ask any beginner cyclist question that you want, and I will make sure to include it in the part 2. As always, my friends, we'll catch you next time.